Welcome to the podcast, the Human Experience Podcast, where we explore the depths of spirituality and our own personal journeys and experiences. I'm Dr. Carlos Garcia.
And I'm Supna Doshi. In this space, we'll reflect on the wisdom of some of the most profound spiritual teachers, from Eckhart Tolle to Ram Dass, Wayne Dyer, Michael Singer. Together, we'll dive into their teachings and share our own insights that have guided us on our own paths of self-discovery.
Each episode will feature inspiring clips from these masters, weaving them into our own reflections and conversations on how spirituality has enriched our daily lives, deepened our understanding of ourselves, and led us to a more meaningful experience.
So, take a deep breath, open your heart, and join us on this journey of exploration. Welcome to the podcast, the Human Experience Podcast.
Thank God for tools.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way that I can bridge the gap for myself between that spirit and the mind. You know, they call it so many different things like mindfulness and meditation and all of these different terms. But for me, if it's a practice, like it's a way of life, but the same ones don't work all the time.
Right.
It depends on, what I'm going through, where I am. And then sometimes none of them work. And then I call Carlos and I'm like, okay, Carlos, lend me some of your tool bags because none of mine are working. Like I'm just in my head and I can't get out, and I can observe it and be aware of it, but stopping that from thinking it to action, like stopping that piece has been very challenging recently for me.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be helpful for listeners to have this sort of contextual framework for what is happening in that space in between, right? Where we can say we're getting lost or where we're forgetting.
If you took the tiny little spark that began you and tried to find its origination point and reduced it down to its smallest, tiniest fragment and ultimately put it into what we call a particle accelerator and revved it up as fast as you can rev it up and collided it and try to find out what was the basis, what is the spark that began you, what did it look like? You open up that particle accelerator, you look inside, and there's nothing there. You came from energy. And then you were in your parents' womb, your mother's womb, for this 9 months. And in those 9 months of being inside of your mother's womb, everything that you needed for the physical journey and for the entire journey was taken care of. It was all handled for you. There was nothing for you to do. In the Tao, it says, you're doing nothing. You're just being done. Have you ever had that awareness? You ever look in the mirror and realize that this has nothing to do with anything that you're doing? You're just being done. Things start happening.
Right. Yeah. That distance, that feels like very like my daily work, right? Ever since having this sort of profound awakening moment. Right. I've heard it also described as integration. Like, how do you come back into daily life in all of the ways that you've been wired with and integrate this thing that you've now experienced within your being?
There's such a great segment I heard from Ram Dass where he talked about how he was in India and on that spiritual journey, and then he came home and his dad just asked him, do you have a job? And like that, he was back.
Yeah. If you think you're enlightened, go home and spend a week with your parents, right? Two really powerful things that happened this week that I feel are relevant and can maybe give, sort of an understanding. So one is this young man that I work with, and he's, not even 20 yet, but, has a father that sort of introduced the Tao Te Ching to him very early on in his life. And so he's like very aware. He's a very conscious, 19-year-old. And part of our work together is his sharing of how frustrating it is, the path, right? Like, we don't call it that, but like, we'll jump on a call and I'm just so frustrated, and why do I feel this way, and I'm feeling depressed and I'm feeling disconnected. And then you could just tell over the course of our hour together, some of that starts to sort of just like come off, right, fade away, and we arrive back at that place of like, oh right, how it all is. And then there's a shift in mood, there's a shift in his energy, and it's like, oh right, yeah, like we just keep forgetting. And by the end of the call, he's like, right, I got it. And I was like, okay, so I'll see you next week when you've forgotten again and you're kicking and screaming. Like, why does it have to be this way?
And I feel like, to a degree, like, as communities, I mean, I have this sense that we used to do that before with each other.
Yeah.
I have this sense that our community was where we turned to when we forgot, and they were there to remind us. And I feel, I mean, personally, I feel completely isolated and besides my therapist on speed dial, those are the people that I go to be reminded now. And so it just made me think, like, the more we can have these, conversations with each other on an, normalizing these conversations with each other on a society basis, on a community basis, I think the less intense it would be when we can remind each other.
Yeah, I agree, and it speaks to the sort of second incident or event that I wanted to share was having lunch. Somebody I just met at a gathering recently, and can tell, right, very sort of heart centered, sort of spiritual, but we didn't get to meet, sort of know each other very well, and then over lunch, it was so interesting. Like, we started this conversation around like business owners and like the challenges of life, and then the conversation just sort of organically moved into, right, like this understanding that we are both souls, loving beings navigating this like human existence. And again, if you were witnessing this conversation, you would see it go from this like amplified like anxiety and like, oh my God, all the things we struggle with, to this moment where I just like glared right through her eyeballs into her soul and be like, yeah, you get what we're doing here, right? Like, you are a part of it all. You are like, this is what we're doing, right? And then this like moment of like connection and ease. And so, in some cultures it's called satsang, or it's called the sangha, right? I had this really powerful meditation session recently where those words became like really relevant. Like, I understood them on a soul level, because I was like, oh my God, I have so many people in my life that like we haven't communicated to each other that that's what we are. But that's exactly the purpose that they fulfill in my life, like you and like other people that are a constant reminder for me. One, of how easy it is to get lost in our humanness, but two, of how it feels to then be connected again and remind each other.
And I think that's speaking of kind of a framework or a structure, that's probably like the biggest one. It wasn't even on my radar, but I think that is the biggest one. It's like building a community around us where we can have these conversations, where we can remind each other, where how are you is not I'm fine.
And I think too, like the question this young man asked me is like, why do we forget? Why do we keep forgetting? And why so often? My understanding, probably somewhat primitive understanding, I'm sure, of it all, is just like, there are so many like just pulls from the system, I call it, right? Like the day to day, the mind is wired to problem solve and seek solutions, and right, the constant exposure to society and its messaging and social media, and and the ways our personalities and roles have been enforced, and even in our own minds, right? Like who I am. I'm a psychologist. I am Carlos. I am a husband. I am, right, and just the ways that sometimes unconsciously we continue to reinforce other roles in our human roles and our human labels. And I think that like that is the work, right? That's why these tools are necessary, because there's such a strong force pulling us in the other direction. I mean, my understanding is that's kind of part of it, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. That is part of the process of becoming an enlightened being and evolving, is continually finding and using those tools so that you're less and less yanked or pulled or being driven by desires and attachments and some of that stuff.
To other spiritualists, so like Wayne Dyer and Michael Singer and Eckhart and Ram Dass, but what you're talking about, that that forgetting, they all say in different words, that is part of the journey, that is part of the awakening. The forgetting is part of the awakening, because it's a continuous, like we tend to think linearly, and the spiritual path is not linear. And so that forgetting is part of the remembering.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, you can't have the light without the dark and the joy without the sadness. Even though we put those labels on it, you can't have the remembering without the forgetting.
Like the first moment of your conception, that moment that you went from non-being to being, you think that it was your parents who did this, that you came from your parents. But I'm speaking on a quantum level here. You didn't come from your parents.
The listening to other spiritual teachers, the communities, right, that we sort of associate ourselves with. Here as we're talking, I have beads in my hand, right? Mantras, right? Meditation, mindfulness, so many practices that, and for me, it's like, oh, now I understand why, you said it earlier, like they don't always work, but like why we need to just have in our toolbox so many of these tools, because the forgetting is so easy. Like the more of these tools that we have, we can, try to sort of stay more centered in that space whenever possible.
I think movement is also a big one for me.
Yeah.
Recently, I started running because it was so bad for me, because the forgetting was I had forgotten to such an extreme. I was like, okay, walking is not going to cut it anymore. But I think movement is a good one. Why things like yoga and sports, and again, they're community activities, so that you start to build that community. But those activities of movement are really powerful in shifting energy within you and kind of take the edge off, so that it's not so intense.
Yeah. And nature is a big one for me.
Nature is huge. And we're blessed to live in, the sunny state of Florida, where we can really relish the nature around us almost every day of the year.
I think at times for me feels, and really what I'm sharing here is right, like the process of this path, which is like, I was going to say, like, it feels so frustrating for me. It's like, I get how this kid feels, right? Like he's speaking our story, right? But like how frustrating it feels sometimes that you can be at times in a place of such deep, like, clarity, right? Or just knowing. And that other moments, it just feels so darn hard and sticky and frustrating. And like, I can see in me the part where part of the suffering is like my desire and yearning for continued clarity, right? For me to be in that space continually, but like that's not where the learning is.
Yeah. And that's attachment too.
Totally.
Being attached to that. I am totally attached to that feeling of bliss all the time. But there's no growth in that.
Yeah.
I think another one, obviously I can label healthy and unhealthy, but distractions sometimes
Mm.
for me when it gets super intense, like, you know, sometimes a distraction is just, it also helps to take the edge off. If I can't, the movement's not working, or it's not helping, or, the conversations, but I just kind of slip back into that place. Um, Sometimes they're just distractions for me, like a really good book, like a really, really good saucy book.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's mindlessly scrolling
Sure.
just to kind of get my brain to stop for a little while. Um, I think obviously there are some other ones that aren't great, like the alcohol or it depends on the use, but and no judgment, just for me, they're not effective.
Yeah.
Distraction. But yeah, distractions sometimes are good.
Yeah. I yeah, I totally agree. There's so much in the world pulling for our attention on a just like minute to minute level, right? I mean, our jobs and our families and the things that we're trying to sort of accomplish in the world can often feel like distractions. Yeah, and again, I just often speak to like how like those like the path of least resistance, right? Like the mind is going to go to what feels easier, right? Like it just is. Like we're just kind of wired that way.
Yeah.
And so why some of these practices can feel challenging or hard, especially at the beginning, like just meditation, right? Anytime I'm trying to teach somebody some skills around meditation, it's like, but it's so hard. Like, yeah, it's supposed to be, right? And we have this general aversion to hard, right? Like we do have
Yeah, I want it to be easy.
right, like we have a preference for the good emotions and when things are easy and pleasant, and like I totally get that, you know.
And I think the heart is just our own suffer, like it's our own creation, because like, yeah, I want things easy. But if I can honestly, like objectively sit down, I'm just making it hard on myself. And that's why it's hard. And if I can let go of that, then it would be easy. But that's too hard to do.
Share with me your version of how you make it hard on yourself, because I know that I do that as well, and I'm like really curious like how that shows up for you.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about roles, I think I can really be self-deprecating
Mm,
when it comes to my attachment to my roles, and but if you don't do this, you're not a good daughter. And and it's not so much judgment from the outside. I never have been somebody who's super attached to how other people see me, but how maybe my parents see me is probably the most attachment that I have. Is, I always want to make them proud with my actions. And so I get really grounded in that role. And so when I'm trying to do something that maybe, for me, that sneaks in and makes it hard.
beautiful.
What about for you?
Two I think two big things that I've been able to sort of notice. One is very similar to yours, right? My idea of my identity of who I'm supposed to be. I mean that in and of itself. And then the piece is who I'm supposed to be is this human who is loving and caring all the time, and um, always offering of myself and leading with kindness and compassion and doing for others, which great, all great things. And part of what creates a lot of, stress and challenges in my life. The other day I was reflecting on this, and a series of questions came up that like I'm working through, but that like sort of stopped me in my tracks, because to explore these feels like really challenging to my ego. And so the questions were like, what if you can let go of the need to be of service to others? what if you can let go of the need to be relevant in the world? And like, there's a part of me that like doesn't even want to explore that. Like, I'm just getting emotional just like thinking about it. Like, what do you mean? That's the identity I've been creating for myself my whole entire life. That is how people view me. That is what people expect of me. That is who I am as a husband and father and a psychologist. And like, what? And the second one, I think you're familiar with in me, which is this storyline that I have had such a hard time breaking with over the years of my life, that things are supposed to be hard. That if I'm intended to grow or become less more of anything, there needs to be a massive amount of friction for that to happen. And so, right, like that's what compelled me to choose the Marine Corps over any of the other military branches, because I knew it was the hardest one.
Yeah.
Right. Why I chose the fire academy I went to, why I do a lot of things in my life, because it's hard. Like I'm intentionally like I know Ram Dass talks about like, putting yourself in the hottest fires. And like sometimes I don't want to, right? Like I don't, but because this is so attached to my identity. I remember taking a walk with you once and I was talking about going on a pilgrimage. The Camino, which is in Spain, and there's multiple ways you can do it. You can go for like the longest route is like a month and a half, and then there's one that's like 2 days. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do the one that's a month and a half. And you were just quiet for a second after I finished speaking. You were like, I wonder if you just went and did the 2 days. And I couldn't hear you. I didn't hear you in that moment, right? I was just like, no, that's silly. And only later did I was like, oh, I see what she was doing. It was so beautiful.
I'm curious because I'm curious if you think those are tied to immigrant stories. Because I was raised by immigrant parents who my whole life told me how hard their lives were. And I feel like I was raised thinking, oh, life is supposed to be hard. I have to work hard. Things will not be easy. And I am meant to suffer.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the programming for me as well.
And it's mind-blowing when you start that path of questioning the things, the foundations really of your identity that you were raised on, that is so unsettling. Because I feel like, I think, well, what if it's not true? It's Byron Katie's 4 questions, right? You have the thought, but what if the thought isn't true? It's like, oh my God, if life is not supposed to be hard, what is it supposed to be? I don't have an identity. What is my identity if I'm not suffering or struggling or serving others? What is my purpose if I cannot be in service to others at all times?
So the work is a way to identify what you yourself are believing, to identify the thoughts that cause all the suffering in the world. For example, you identify a concept or an assumption that you are thinking, believing is causing stress, and you put it up against the following questions. The first question, is it true? Second question, can you absolutely know that it's true, this assumption you're believing? Third question, notice how you react. What happens when you believe that thought, when you're thinking that thought? Fourth question, who would you be without that thought? What would your life be without that thought? So, for example, if you have the thought, he doesn't care about me, and you ask yourself, is it true? He doesn't care about me. Is it true? The work is meditation. It's contemplation. It takes very deep stillness, because what arises to meet that question is pure knowledge, yours. You're the teacher you've been waiting for. And in the stillness, as you Wait for that answer within you to meet, is it true? Amazing things happen. In fact, enlightenment happens. So the second question, can you absolutely know that it's true? Let's say your answer to the first question is yes. Yes, it's true. He doesn't care about me. He told me he doesn't care about me. And so the second question, can you absolutely know that it's true? It gives you an opportunity to experience amazing other ways of seeing that same idea. So I invite you to test it and to see how widely and vastly your mind can open just through the experience of that second question. Can you absolutely know that it's true that he doesn't care about you, or whatever concept and assumption you're questioning? So the third question, how do you react when you believe that thought? How do you react? What happens when you think that thought, that he doesn't care about you or she doesn't care about you? So notice first, emotionally, how that concept shifts your feelings. Notice your heart rate. Notice a depression that may begin to happen. Notice how you react, what happens when you think that thought. Notice the images of past and future that arise when you think that thought. And of course, the emotional comes out of witnessing that apparent past or future that is in your mind's eye now. So that fourth question, who would you be without the thought? He doesn't care about you. Who would you be without the thought? And I'm not asking you to drop the thought. I'm simply asking you to contemplate, to become very still and imagine yourself even with that person. Imagine yourself at the market. Imagine yourself with or without that person, only without the thought, he doesn't care about you. So many of us come to understand very quickly as we experience the answers to these four questions. And the answers, that's where the power is, not in the work, but your answers. So what people begin to notice is that with the thought, that is the cause of all stress and suffering. And without the thought, you cannot suffer. So eventually people come to understand that it is what we are believing that is the cause of our depression, our stress, our heart rate, our emotional, and not what is happening in the world. For example, I see the world as perfect. Everything perfect, no mistake.
Another truth here is that, like, most of the really hard and challenging things in my life have brought profound wisdom and understanding and right. I think like maybe I'm just reinforcing that narrative again here, potentially.
Well, that's what I'm just wondering is like, and what if you did something that was easier? Would it still have led to this profound learning? And you're like, oh, but I didn't have to work as hard for it. So it doesn't mean as much. So my parents won't be as proud of me as if I had actually taken the hardest path.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I'm still working with this one. So, and like just the last handful of workshops that I've done, right? Like I often am speaking to people that have very, challenging careers or do challenging work. And, part of part of what I share is like, embrace the hard, because it's building you to be more resilient. Like that is the thing I share. And people connect with it and they're like, oh yeah, this is amazing. Right. So, but yeah, what if we start to question that? And that really brings into question for me, which I know is a topic you and I talk about at times, like abundance versus scarcity mindset. Yeah, like the thing attached there is like, oh yeah, abundance is possible, and you got to like kill yourself for it. Like you just have to like sacrifice. You just have, right. You hear the narrative.
I do find myself teaching my children, if it's hard, you're doing it wrong. It's not supposed to be hard. I think I say it into belief.
Right.
But I do find, like, in the simplest things, like if I'm opening a jar of pasta sauce and I just can't get it and I'm struggling, like, I stop, I take a breath, and I'm like, it's not supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be easy. You're doing it wrong.
Love it.
And click, it opens and I'm on my way. I do find that pattern in a lot of places in my day. And so that does leave me, you know, and also the personal experience I've had with abundance, and kind of when you do let go of so much of the programming and do just open yourself up to releasing a lot of what is in your head and just to be in your heart, that really the energy that the universe opens up is beyond what I could ever have imagined.
Yeah, and I could really second that, my friend, because, you know, we talked a few episodes ago about that breakfast you and I had where, you know, you really introduced this idea of like letting go in life and what that would look like. And I can look at the last handful of years in my life and seen the places where I've decided consciously, I don't want this to be hard and I'm going to let go here. And yeah, and have just noticed the ways things fall in my lap, the way things feel easier, the way opportunities arise, the way, right, there's just this shift in that deeply ingrained belief system that it has to be hard. Yeah, the universe is providing me with evidence that is true.
I almost feel, and it doesn't work this way, so I do know that, but I do feel like there are moments in my life, like very clear for me, milestones where I am fighting and I am struggling and I am a strong believer in I have to work for this, and it won't work and it won't work and it won't work. Fertility being a very strong lesson for 10 years. And when I finally got to a place of pure surrender, acceptance of what is, well, maybe it's not supposed to be that way. That it was almost like a check mark went into a box. The universe is like, oh, she learned that lesson. Okay, give her the babies.
Don't just give her a baby. We're going to give you 3.
Because now you have more lessons to learn.
Yeah.
And we have to remind you about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like, you know, that was one of the big starts of it. But then since then, you know, which is almost 12 years now, I've noticed that pattern in my life, that with the big things that I'm struggling with, when I can honestly, on a soul level, just release it and just let it go and come to a place of acceptance, it just magically like resolves itself in the most where I don't have to do anything much really, and I have to show up and do my work, which is staying, you know, in my soul and really working on myself, and the rest of it like just
falls into place.
Just falls into place.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah, that you know, I'm really trying to walk that path now. Not trying, I am, right? And that you know, as you were saying that, the word faith sort of popped into my mind, like you know, the trust or the faith that we sometimes need to have that it's going to work out, because I think that's where, at least for me, there's I don't know that I would always label it a fear, but whatever that resistance that lives there of letting go, of surrendering, is like, right, I need to be in control, because if I'm not, like, it, you know, bad things might happen. And I know that that's deeply, you know, sort of that's wiring that's coming, you know, deeply ingrained from my upbringing and you know, my family history and a lot of that. But you know, the other piece I was going to sort of share is like, one of the things where you and I connect is we're business owners, right? We're sort of type A personalities in some ways. We're doers. We live in a society here in the U.S. where a lot of what success means, or it's like the achieving, the becoming, the creating a plan, the executing of that plan, the doing, the having control, the right. And so, like, it's been so funny sometimes where I'm sitting around with another person in business or an entrepreneur, and we're talking about strategy, let's say, about how this next business is going to go down, and I hear or I feel myself getting caught up in, like, oh my god, I don't have a plan for this thing, or I'm not, my marketing strategy isn't on point, right? And that, like, communicating to this other business person who maybe isn't as awake, as aware, like, oh, I'm just trusting the universe, right? And they're like, wait, what? How are you crazy? Like, what's wrong with you?
Totally. I mean, that has been day one of me running my business. Once I actually experienced the universe at a level where it started to resonate for me, that the ideas of abundance and service to others, and that, what's the saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. That release of what success looks like for everybody else, because it has to come at, the sacrifice of somebody else, that my success has to come at the sacrifice of somebody else, which is completely bogus, right, baloney, ego stuff, that everybody can be uberly successful all the time, but that we get in our own way.
Yeah. And I love two things that you said there a minute ago. One was, right, the ways that you tried to remain, with the use of your tools or not, the ways that you try to remain centered in your awareness, right, in your soul, and how absolutely critical that is, not only for our path, but for how we're navigating the world. And back to this idea of community, Ram Dass, like, this is one of the things Ram Dass speaks about that has always just profoundly stood with me. That is that our only work is to continue to do the work on ourselves, so that we can be a vehicle for others to do the same, or for others to awaken, or for others, when they are ready. Right. And so that shift of identity from who I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing for others to, oh, I just need to work on myself every day. I just need to seat myself in my practices to continue to reside in that space of expansion, awareness, openness, letting go of the stories, the narratives, the beliefs, the things that keep us limited, so that just, right, it can be a model. It can be a model for others to see that that's even possible, what that looks like, for inspiration. I mean, right, it doesn't, right, we're not creating what that means for other people in their lives. Like, our only objective is just to keep going inward and reminding ourselves.
Yeah, and we have those guides like Singer, who can show us you can run a business, you can be very successful, you can stay soul-centered, and he's got amazing books and amazing tools and talks that show his path. I think that concept of, because when I hear that, and when I first heard that, I'm like, well, I can't go off to the Himalayas. I got 3 babies now. So if you told me that 6 months ago, we could talk, but now I can't do that. But they all talk about, Eckhart and everybody talks about how you can do the work within the scope of the roles that you've chosen. And that's the work. What I love about some of the things I've been listening to recently, and especially, I think, Byron Katie, I heard her talk about it. It's this return to that childhood innocence that we had when we were born. There was no human that went in and put our eyes into our body and our nose into our body and our mother's stomach. Like, that was all taken care of by the universe, right? And so then when we're born, the parents want to take over because we're adults and we have the ego developed now. It's like, oh, I could do better than the universe. So let me make sure that you don't run a fever, and let me make sure you don't touch this dirty thing, et cetera, et cetera. But she talks about returning to that childhood innocence where everything is just based on curiosity, where you giggle about everything. My daughter drives me bananas when she giggles and giggles and giggles and will laugh and laugh and laugh. I mean, for like 20 minutes at the dinner table. And I'm like, you're supposed to be eating. I'm like, oh no, you're you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and I should be doing more of what you're doing.
Oh my God.
And so I think it's that when you talk about, I think it's like that connection back to that source of wherever it is that we came from. It's that connection back to the knowing. It's the connection back to the lightheartedness and the deep breaths and the ease of the flow of life. And that all of these tools that we've talked about, like, are just different ways to help us get there, stay there, go back there, wherever we are in our path.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Podcast, the Human Experience Podcast. We're so grateful to have shared this time with you.
As we continue recording new episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like us to explore, and tell us about your own spiritual journey. We want to connect with you.
Give us a call at 800-791-3884 and leave us a voicemail. You might just be featured on a future episode of The Podcast.
Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, keep walking your path with peace